A caretaker of a mansion becomes suspicious of a frequent visitor who always shows up when the homeowners are away. He checks the cameras to see what the visitor does in the owner's absence and discovers something unexpected. Jack woke up that morning with a sense of unease in his chest. The sun had barely risen over the horizon, and the mansion, imposing and silent, seemed wrapped in a shroud of mystery. While preparing coffee in the kitchen, the silence of the house, which used to be comforting, now brought a sense of discomfort. The hallways, once familiar, now seemed to hide secrets within the marble walls and the old paintings that narrated stories from a forgotten era. The mansion was grand, with its crystal chandeliers and silk carpets, but that morning it seemed to whisper something Jack couldn't quite grasp. The homeowners, an elegant and discreet couple, were away for a few days, as they often were. Jack, faithful to his role as caretaker, always took care of everything with extreme dedication, but this time, something felt different. As he walked through the corridors, he felt a chill that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from an invisible presence, something that seemed to watch his steps closely. He ran his fingers over the gilded frames, as if searching for an answer among the faces in the paintings. It was as if the mansion itself was trying to tell him something, but the words were stuck in the air. In the garden, the flowers that once were vibrant seemed to have lost some of their color. The birds' songs sounded distant, almost muffled by the thick morning fog. Jack approached the large iron gate, watching the empty road ahead. A feeling of isolation enveloped him, as if he were trapped in a painting made centuries ago. "Am I imagining things?" he murmured to himself, trying to dismiss the growing sense of foreboding inside him. While watering the plants in the indoor garden, Jack's mind kept returning to the house, to the small changes he had noticed over the past few days. A door that didn't creak before now made a slight noise when opened. A lamp that always stayed on until late at night was found off in the morning. And there was that persistent feeling, as if something or someone had passed through the corridors while he slept, leaving only a subtle trace of its presence. With each step, the tension grew. Jack began to question whether he should speak to the owners about his concerns, but what would he say? "The house feels different?" It sounded vague and even ridiculous, but the feeling was real, almost tangible. He paused for a moment in the large living room, watching his own reflection in the immense windows overlooking the garden. Shadows from the past seemed to play there, hiding secrets he was determined to uncover. Jack knew something had changed, and he wouldn't rest until he discovered what it was. It was on a foggy afternoon that Jack, while tending to the rose bushes in the front garden, saw Henry for the first time. A man with a polished appearance, neatly combed gray hair, and a suit that seemed tailor-made. Henry was not the usual type of visitor the mansion received. He arrived unhurried, his impeccably shiny shoes treading softly on the stone path. Jack looked up from his work, wiping his hands on his pants, as Henry approached the gate with a calculated calm, as if he knew the place better than anyone. Without announcing himself, Henry pushed the gate open and walked straight to the main entrance. Jack felt a twinge of discomfort, but before he could approach, Henry turned to him, offering an enigmatic smile. "Good afternoon," he said with a soft, controlled voice. "I'm here on a private matter. Are the owners expecting me?" That phrase carried a weight that Jack couldn't immediately explain. Even so, he maintained his composure, replying that the owners were absent. Henry, without showing surprise, simply nodded, as if that was not news to him. After a brief exchange of words, Henry went to the front door, and with a silver key that gleamed in the fading light, he unlocked it with ease. Jack, watching the scene, felt a wave of doubt engulf him. He had never seen that man before, but there he was, entering the mansion as if he were an old acquaintance of the house. Jack's hands clenched into fists, an uncomfortable sensation growing in his chest. How did Henry have access to that key? And why did he only appear when the owners were away? In the days that followed, Henry's presence became a constant. He always showed up right after the owners left, and his timings were precise, almost as if he knew exactly when the house would be empty. With each new visit, Jack's suspicion grew. The man didn't try to be discreet, but there was something about his behavior that kept Jack on alert. Henry wandered through the corridors, his sharp eyes observing every detail, as if he were searching for something only he knew was there. Once, Jack tried to approach to offer help or ask if he needed anything, but Henry always deflected the conversation with a cold smile and a vague response. "I'm just admiring the architecture of the house," he would say, while his eyes fixed on a point Jack couldn't see. There was tension in the air, a sense that every word exchanged was carefully measured, every movement meticulously calculated. The mansion, which once seemed imposing, now became a labyrinth of mysteries, and Henry was the key to them all. Jack, increasingly suspicious, couldn't take his eyes off Henry during his visits. He began to notice that the man always followed the same path through the house, visiting the same rooms, stopping in the same places. It was as if Henry was trying to decipher an invisible puzzle, something he knew was hidden there, but had not yet found. And with each passing day, Jack felt that time was running out, that soon Henry would discover what he was looking for. Jack knew something was not right, but it was the growing unease that made him pay more attention to the details. He began to watch Henry with an almost imperceptible care, always keeping his distance and avoiding drawing attention. Every time the mysterious visitor appeared, Jack found an excuse to stay nearby, sweeping the corridor, adjusting curtains, or simply passing from one room to another. His eyes followed Henry with precision, recording every movement, every gesture, every look the man cast over the old mansion. There was something unsettling about the way Henry explored the house. He never stayed long in one place, moving with silent agility. His hands ran over the surfaces of old furniture, as if trying to capture some sensation forgotten by time. Sometimes he would stop in front of a seemingly ordinary wall, observing it with intensity, as if trying to see through it. Jack, disguising his curiosity, would pass by casually, capturing those moments with the precision of a mental photographer. Once, while Henry was examining a shelf in the library, Jack noticed something peculiar. The visitor seemed more interested in the empty spaces between the books than in the books themselves. His fingers slid between the bindings, touching the back of the shelf with a sort of reverence, as if searching for something hidden. Jack, pretending to organize the nearby books, tried to conceal his interest, but his heart was beating faster. What is he looking for? The question echoed in his mind, bringing a sense of urgency he couldn't ignore. With each visit, Henry became more meticulous, exploring new corners of the mansion that even Jack had considered irrelevant. There was a day when he spent almost an hour in the basement, a place that was rarely visited except for storing old and unused items. When Henry emerged from the depths of the basement, there was a gleam in his eyes, a clear sign that he was getting closer to something. Jack, watching from the top of the stairs, felt a chill run down his spine. What could Henry have found down there? The encounters with Henry became a game of cat and mouse. Jack kept his watch discreet, but his mind was constantly alert. He began to memorize the path Henry took through the mansion, the rooms he visited most frequently, the times he lingered longer than necessary. The visitor had an almost ritualistic routine, and Jack, more patient than ever, waited for the right moment to discover what was going on. One day, while Henry was in the living room, Jack noticed something new. Henry was carrying a small leather notebook, worn by time. Occasionally, he would open it and make quick notes, almost scribbles. Jack, spying from afar, tried to decipher what was being written, but the distance was too great. However, he knew that those notes had some deep meaning, perhaps a mental map of what Henry was uncovering in the mansion. Time passed, and Jack realized that he couldn't wait much longer. He needed to understand what Henry was plotting before it was too late. Every step Henry took was like a clue in a dangerous game, and Jack, now more attentive than ever, began to connect the dots. But the question that tormented him was, what would happen when all the pieces fit together? Henry seemed to be getting closer to his goal, and Jack knew that the answer to his doubts was hidden in those small movements, the quick glances, and the hurriedly scribbled notes. Jack then decided he had observed enough. Henry was assembling a puzzle, but Jack was also beginning to understand the game. The mansion held deep secrets, and Henry seemed to be one step away from revealing them, but Jack would not allow him to do so without fully understanding what was at stake. From that moment on, he knew he had to act, and fast. That night, The sky was dark, starless, and the mansion seemed to be engulfed in an unsettling silence. Jack, sitting in front of the security monitor, felt the tension in his shoulders as he watched the flickering screens. He knew he had to do it, search through the security camera recordings. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard for a moment before finally deciding. He began to rewind the footage, going back through the days and nights in search of something that would confirm his suspicions. As the images passed quickly before his eyes, Jack felt his heart race. The cameras, which had once been just part of his routine surveillance, now became his eyes and ears in search of answers. He saw routine scenes, the mansion's owners coming and going, deliveries being made, everything seemed normal, until Henry appeared in the recordings. There he was, moving through the house with the same calmness Jack had witnessed in person. But now, seen through the camera lenses, there was something much more disturbing in his behavior. Jack adjusted the monitor, focusing on one of the recordings where Henry was walking through the second-floor corridor. He noticed how the visitor paused for a few seconds in front of certain doors, always the same ones. His movements were calculated, and there was a strange solemnity in every gesture. Jack fast-forwarded the recording a bit more, following Henry to the office. There, he seemed lost in thought, standing in front of a wall that, at first glance, had nothing special about it. But then, something changed. Henry leaned slightly, touching the surface with his fingertips, as if feeling something only he could perceive. Each new recording revealed small details that would go unnoticed by a casual observer, but not by Jack. He realized that Henry had a pattern, a sequence that he followed with precision. It was as if the visitor was mapping the house, but for what purpose? Jack rewound the tape to a specific moment, a night when the homeowners were out at an event. In that recording, Henry seemed especially determined, heading straight to the basement. The camera captured only Henry's entrance and exit, but even those few images left Jack with a bad feeling. Jack continued his investigation until the early hours of the morning, his eyes fixed on the monitor, trying not to miss any detail. He knew he was getting closer to something important, something that Henry was carefully hiding. In one of the more recent recordings, Jack noticed that Henry wasn't just moving through the house. He was interacting with objects, rearranging small details, changing the positions of pictures and ornaments. It was as if he was trying to align something invisible, something only he knew what it was. Finally, Jack paused one of the recordings and sat there, staring at the screen in silence. Henry had done something unexpected, disappearing from one of the cameras for a brief moment, only to reappear in another with an object that Jack did not immediately recognize. That moment, almost imperceptible, left Jack even more intrigued. Whatever Henry was doing, he was only a few steps away from finishing. Jack knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to find out what was happening before it was too late. He took a deep breath, knowing that from that moment on, there would be no turning back. Whatever Henry was planning, Jack was determined to uncover it, and he was prepared for what might come next. When Jack revisited the recordings one more time, already with fatigue weighing on him, it was then that the most disturbing images appeared before his eyes. The camera's clock read shortly after midnight. On the screen, Henry moved with unsettling precision, as if he knew exactly what he was about to do. He was in the basement, the camera capturing the dark and damp environment. Suddenly, Henry began removing objects from an old wooden chest that Jack had never noticed before. Carefully, he arranged each item on the stone floor, creating a pattern that at first glance seemed random, but would soon reveal its purpose. Jack's heart raced as Henry lit a series of candles around the objects. The flickering flame cast shadows that danced on the stone walls, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. The silence was interrupted only by Henry's low whisper, murmuring words in a language that Jack did not recognize, but which sounded ancient, powerful, and laden with a dark weight. The visitor was not just any man. He was performing a ritual, and every movement seemed part of a meticulously planned ceremony. Jack watched, unable to look away, as Henry drew symbols on the floor with a substance that looked like blood. The dark liquid slowly dripped, creating shapes that intertwined as if they had a life of their own. Henry's words became more intense, almost like an invocation, and the surrounding environment seemed to react. The shadows on the walls stretched, becoming denser, as if the darkness itself was moving in sync with the ritual. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. There was an energy in the air that he couldn't explain, something that seemed to pull back the veil between the real world and something much older and unknown. At one point, Henry knelt in the center of the symbols, his arms outstretched in a gesture that seemed both supplicant and commanding. His eyes were closed, but his face expressed absolute concentration, as if he were connecting with an invisible force around him. The basement, which had once been just a forgotten space in the mansion, now seemed like the epicenter of something immensely larger, something that surpassed the limits of human understanding. Jack couldn't quite hear what Henry was saying, but he could feel the intensity of each syllable, as if the very air around him was vibrating with the energy of the words. Then, something inexplicable happened. The candles, which had been burning calmly up until that moment, began to flicker violently, as if they were about to be extinguished by an invisible gust of wind. The shadows on the walls seemed to writhe, taking on forms that did not belong to this world. When the ritual finally came to an end, Henry slowly stood up, his eyes still closed, and extinguished the candles one by one, as if sealing whatever he had invoked. The basement returned to its normal state, but Jack knew that nothing there was the same anymore. The visitor carefully stored the objects back in the chest, wiped the traces of blood from the floor, and then, as if nothing had happened, climbed the stairs and disappeared into the shadows of the mansion. Jack, still in shock, remained silent for a long time, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The feeling that he was involved in something much larger than he had imagined was now inescapable. What Henry had done that night was not just a ritual, it was the key to a secret that the mansion hid deep within its history. And Jack knew that, like it or not, he was about to discover what really lay behind the walls he thought he knew so well. In the days that followed Henry's ritual, Jack couldn't shake the disturbing images he had witnessed from his mind. He decided that he needed to investigate further to understand what was really happening inside that mansion. Driven by a mix of curiosity and fear, Jack began to explore every corner of the house with renewed attention, looking for any clue that could explain the strange occurrences. And it was during one of these investigations that he found something that would completely change his perception of the place. In one of the less used rooms, a space that had long fallen into the owner's neglect, Jack noticed a detail that had gone unnoticed by everyone for years. Behind a heavy bookcase, he found discrete marks on the walls, almost invisible drawings, as if they had been made with something older than paint. With effort, he pushed the bookcase aside, revealing what appeared to be a wooden panel carved with enigmatic symbols. Some were similar to those he had seen Henry draw during the ritual, while others seemed even older and more complex. The sight of those symbols made Jack's heart race. They were not mere decorations. There was something deeply ritualistic about them, something he could feel, even without fully understanding. Carefully, he ran his fingers over the marks, feeling the uneven texture of the wood. In some places, there were deep scratches, as if someone had tried to remove or hide those symbols at some point. And then he noticed, in the lower corner of the panel, a small, almost imperceptible cavity that seemed to have been made to fit something specific. Determined to uncover what that panel was hiding, Jack continued his search. In another room, a rarely used old office, he found a finely crafted wooden box covered by a thick layer of dust. Upon opening it, he found a collection of ancient objects, medallions, metal pieces with unknown inscriptions, and a small bronze key, carefully stored in a secret compartment. The key seemed to have been made to fit the cavity he had discovered on the panel. With the key in hand, Jack returned to the room and, with trembling hands, inserted it into the cavity on the panel. To his surprise, the mechanism still worked, despite years of neglect. With a soft click, the panel opened, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, he found a small, dark wooden chest, intricately decorated with the same symbols that adorned the panel. Upon opening the chest, Jack was confronted with a set of ancient manuscripts, yellowed with age, and a medallion that seemed to pulse with an almost palpable energy. As he examined the manuscripts, Jack realized that they were written in a language he could not decipher, but the drawings and symbols were clear. The pages were filled with detailed diagrams, complex rituals, and references to something called the Shadow Guardian. It was evident that these documents were extremely old and that they guarded secrets that should have remained buried. The medallion, in turn, had a strange weight in Jack's hands, as if it contained a force he did not understand but knew to be dangerous. Closing the chest and covering the panel, Jack felt a mixture of triumph and fear. He had uncovered part of the mystery, but at the same time, he knew he was delving into something that might be much larger than he imagined. The symbols, the manuscripts, the medallion, all pointed to an ancient secret, something connected to the very essence of the mansion and Henry's disturbing presence. Jack, now more determined than ever, was set on discovering the whole truth, even if it meant confronting forces he could barely comprehend. In the days following the discovery of the symbols and manuscripts, Jack began to observe Henry with a new awareness. Now, every step the visitor took through the mansion seemed part of a meticulous, almost obsessive search. It wasn't just a simple exploration of the house. Henry moved like someone on a precise mission, guided by knowledge that Jack did not yet possess. Jack noticed how he followed specific patterns, always returning to the same places, checking the same areas, as if he knew that something of great value was hidden there. One afternoon, while Jack pretended to be focused on cleaning a chandelier in the main hall, he saw Henry again in the office where the small chest had been found. This time, Henry was hunched over the desk, carefully studying an ancient map that seemed to have been taken from one of the books in the library. He ran his fingers over the faded lines with a disturbing intensity, his eyes fixed on the marked points. Jack watched from afar, realizing that Henry was drawing a connection between the map and the places he visited in the mansion. There was logic in his movements, a pattern that he followed with almost military precision. Henry's obsession became more evident every day. He seemed fixated on certain objects, in particular, that would go unnoticed by anyone else. A dusty statuette in the second-floor hallway, a landscape painting that no one else noticed. He examined them carefully, sometimes tilting them to see what was behind, other times touching them as if trying to feel something through them. Jack began to understand that Henry was not just exploring the house. He was searching for something specific, something he believed had been hidden there a long time ago. On one occasion, Jack noticed that Henry had spent hours in the library, surrounded by old books that he had taken from the highest shelves, the ones even the mansion's owners didn't consult. Henry flipped through the yellowed pages with fierce concentration, noting details in his leather notebook. Jack spied through the slightly open door, noticing how the visitor compared the texts with the map, his expression becoming more tense with each new discovery. The library's silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the soft sound of pages turning and Henry's low murmur, as if he were talking to himself. Jack began to piece together a puzzle in his mind. The pieces were scattered throughout the house, but he was beginning to see the bigger picture. Henry was searching for something ancient and valuable, something that perhaps even the owners themselves did not know existed, and with each of Henry's new moves, it became clear that he was getting closer to finding what he was looking for. The expression on Henry's face, a mix of anxiety and determination, revealed that he was just a few steps away from his goal. Jack felt that time was running out, both for him and the visitor. It was late at night when Jack finally confronted the truth. Henry was after something that did not belong to the present, something that had been left behind by past generations. The visitor was not just an intruder, he was a hunter of secrets, unearthing what should have remained buried. The tension in the mansion grew with each passing minute. Jack felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew he was involved in something much larger than himself, something that could change the fate of everyone involved. Henry was close to finding what he sought, but Jack was not willing to let that happen without fully understanding what was at stake. With a knot in his stomach and his heart racing, Jack decided it was time to confront the mansion's secrets before Henry did. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, but a complete picture was still missing. Determined to learn more, he returned to the library, where Henry spent so much time, and began to sift through the old books that the visitor consulted. In the back of a dusty shelf, Jack found an old diary, its fragile pages covered with almost illegible handwriting. It was a diary of a former owner of the mansion, someone who had lived there centuries before. Every word seemed heavy, laden with secrets that time had tried to erase. As he flipped through the pages, Jack felt the atmosphere in the room change. The story that unfolded before his eyes was dark and unsettling. The diary mentioned strange events, rituals performed in secret, and an incessant search for something the author called the key to eternity. There were references to a secret society that met at the mansion, using the ancient symbols carved on the walls and objects as part of obscure ceremonies. Jack began to understand that the mansion was not just a home, but a place where ancient and dangerous forces had been invoked. A specific entry in the diary caught Jack's attention. The author mentioned a night when something terrible happened during one of those rituals. An attempt to control a power beyond human comprehension had gone disastrously wrong, resulting in tragedy. The details were vague, as if the writer was afraid to document everything. Jack shivered as he realized that this power, whatever it was, had never truly been banished. It was merely dormant, waiting to be awakened again. The mansion, so grand on the outside, harbored within its walls a macabre past, hidden from all except those who knew where to look. Jack realized that the deaths and disappearances mentioned in the diary, which had been attributed to illness or accidents, were actually direct consequences of the dark practices that had taken place there. The property was steeped in the darkness that its former residents had brought into its walls, and Henry somehow was trying to access it once again. Amidst the notes, Jack found a reference to a specific object, a medallion that, according to the author, was the key to unlocking the mansion's final secret. The medallion had the power to reveal what was hidden, but at the same time, it carried with it a terrible curse. Jack immediately thought of the medallion he had found earlier, stored in the chest behind the secret panel. Everything made sense now. Henry was after this medallion, believing it would lead him to whatever was hidden in the mansion. As he read the final pages of the diary, Jack understood the gravity of the situation. The mansion's past was darker than he could have ever imagined. At the same time, he knew that Henry was closer than ever to unearthing that past. Jack felt like he was racing against time, not just to protect the mansion's secrets, but to prevent the evil residing within it from being unleashed once more. The air around him seemed heavy, laden with the presence of those who had suffered before. Jack could no longer shake the feeling that he knew Henry from somewhere, in a way he couldn't explain. Determined to find out more, he began to investigate not only the mansion's past, but also the visitor's history. One quiet afternoon, while Henry was away, Jack searched the room where Henry usually stayed during his visits. In the drawers and on the shelves, he found only the essentials for a man passing through, but hidden between the pages of an old book, there was a photograph, yellowed with age. The image showed a young man with piercing eyes and an enigmatic smile, standing in front of the mansion, but with a disturbing detail. The man was identical to Henry. The photograph was clearly old, dating back several decades, perhaps even a century. Jack felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that the man in the photo couldn't be Henry, at least not as he knew him. He turned the photograph over and found an almost faded inscription, H. Whitmore, 1923. Jack recoiled, his heart racing. It couldn't be. How could Henry be in the photo, looking the same as he did now? Gripped by urgency, Jack returned to the old diary he had found, searching for any mention of the name Whitmore. And there it was. Henry Whitmore was one of the most prominent members of the secret society that used the mansion as the center of their rituals. According to the diary, Henry had mysteriously disappeared after a ritual that had gone terribly wrong. The society believed he had died, but the body was never found. Jack began connecting the dots, and the truth emerged like a nightmare. The Henry he knew was not just an ordinary visitor. He was the same man from the photograph, somehow still alive. Or worse, something more than alive. The evidence was irrefutable, but the implication was terrifying. Jack realized that Henry was not just a man. He was a living relic of a time that should have remained buried in the past. And more than that, Henry was searching for something he believed he had a right to, something he had left behind decades earlier. The medallion Jack had found, the rituals, the ancient symbols, all were part of a much larger plan, a plan Henry was determined to complete at any cost. Jack felt panic rising within him, but also a fierce determination. He knew he was dealing with something beyond comprehension, something that couldn't be dealt with in the usual way. Henry, or whatever he was now, was hunting for power, for a force that had been sealed within the mansion, and that, if unleashed, could bring unimaginable consequences. The revelation of Henry's true identity changed everything for Jack. He was no longer just protecting a house. He was confronting a man who had cheated time, a man who was a shadow from the past, returning to finish what he had started. With each new discovery, the terror grew. Jack now knew that Henry was not just a simple threat. He was the embodiment of the mansion's darkest secrets. And as dusk fell over the property, bringing with it a deeper darkness than usual, Jack understood that a confrontation was inevitable. Henry Whitmore was not just a visitor, but a central piece in a plot that transcended the mansion's own history. And Jack, terrifying as it was, knew that he was destined to be the last barrier between Henry and what he sought. Jack's mind was in turmoil. He knew he had little time to make a decision. The revelation about Henry had changed everything, and now he found himself facing an impossible choice. Should he confront Henry directly, risking a confrontation with a man who, by all indications, had escaped the clutches of time? Or should he alert the owners, putting them at risk of something they couldn't even imagine existed? Jack felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that any misstep could have terrible consequences. As he walked through the mansion's silent hallways, Jack pondered his options. Confronting Henry meant putting his own life in danger, facing a being who might possess knowledge and powers beyond his understanding. But at the same time, alerting the owners could expose them to a terrifying truth, and worse still, make them targets for Henry. Jack knew the mansion's owners were good people, innocent regarding the house's dark past. Involving them in this nightmare could ruin them in ways that were irreparable. That night, Jack struggled to sleep. The shadows in the mansion seemed heavier, the whispers of the wind more unsettling. Every noise echoing through the empty corridors made him imagine Henry lurking, waiting for the right moment to act. He couldn't shake the image of the man in the photograph, young and identical to the Henry he knew now. The same Henry who was, without a doubt, searching for something hidden within those walls, something he believed was rightfully his. Jack knew that by crossing paths with this man, he had become involved in something much bigger than he could handle. Dawn brought little clarity. Jack, tired and anxious, tried to think rationally. If he confronted Henry, he would need a solid plan, something that would give him an advantage. But what if he failed? What would happen to the mansion, to the owners, to himself? On the other hand, if he decided to warn them, he would have to expose the whole truth, something that sounded like an impossible madness to believe. What if they don't believe me? The question echoed in his mind, increasing his despair. He could end up alone, without support, facing Henry on his own. The decision was suffocating, and Jack knew he couldn't delay it much longer. Time was running out, and Henry was getting closer to achieving his goal. Finally, in a moment of clarity, Jack realized that what was at stake was not just his own safety, or that of the owners. There was something much deeper, something that was dormant in that mansion, and that, if awakened, could bring incalculable harm. Jack felt the gravity of the situation weighing on his shoulders, and with a heavy sigh he made his decision. He decided to confront Henry. There was no other choice. Somehow, Jack knew it was his duty to protect the mansion and its owners, even if it meant risking everything. The truth about Henry and the mansion's dark secrets could not be revealed to anyone else, not as long as he had the strength to prevent it. The day of Henry's next visit arrived faster than Jack had expected. The air in the mansion seemed even denser, charged with a tension only he could feel. With every passing minute, the anticipation became more suffocating. When he finally heard the sound of the gate opening and Henry's footsteps echoing on the marble floor, Jack knew the moment had arrived. He was ready, or at least as ready as he could be, to face the man who was not just a visitor, but a threat from a past that should never have been reopened. Henry entered the mansion with the same calm as always, but Jack noticed something different in his eyes. There was an almost feverish gleam, a determination that seemed to have intensified since the last time he had been there. Jack watched as Henry walked through the corridors, following the same meticulous path he always took. But this time, Jack didn't follow him in silence. Instead, he gathered his courage and stepped forward, blocking Henry's path in the corridor that led to the office. The visitor stopped, a slight smile curving his lips, as if he already knew what was about to happen. "Henry," Jack began, his voice firm despite his racing heart. "We need to talk." Henry raised an eyebrow, the smile remaining, but it didn't reach his eyes. "About what, Jack? The history of this house? Or about what you really want to know?" Henry's words were sharp, cutting through the air like blades, but Jack didn't let himself be intimidated. He knew there was no turning back now. "I know what you're doing," Jack continued, taking a step forward. "I know who you are, or at least who you were." For a moment, silence hung between them, dense and heavy. Henry tilted his head slightly as if studying Jack, assessing his determination. "And what do you intend to do with that information, Jack?" Henry's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it was laden with a power that made Jack shiver. "Do you think you can stop me?" Jack, feeling the weight of his own words, responded, "If I have to, yes. I won't let you continue with this." Henry's expression changed, the smile slowly fading, replaced by a coldness that sent chills down Jack's spine. Without warning, Henry lunged forward, his hand moving as fast as a striking snake. Jack barely had time to react before he felt the impact, being slammed against the wall with a force that didn't match Henry's refined appearance. "You don't understand, Jack," Henry growled, his eyes now glowing with an almost supernatural intensity. "This isn't about you or this house. It's about something much bigger, something you could never comprehend." Jack struggled against Henry's grip, his mind racing to find a way to escape. With tremendous effort, Jack managed to break free, stumbling backward but maintaining his firm stance. "It doesn't matter what it is," he gasped. "I won't let you destroy this house and what it stands for." Henry laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. "You're brave, Jack. But bravery won't save you. It won't save them." With those words, Henry stepped back, releasing Jack and adjusting his suit as if nothing had happened. "But since you're so determined to know the truth," he said, his tone soft but deadly, "then come. Let me show you what you so desperately want to find." Still breathless, Jack nodded, knowing he was about to enter a dangerous game where the rules were unknown and the stakes higher than he ever imagined. The confrontation was far from over, but one thing was certain. Henry was willing to reveal everything, and Jack, prepared or not, would have to face the truth behind the mansion's secrets. With an unsettling calm, Henry guided Jack through the mansion's corridors, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. The air seemed heavier with each step, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Jack felt a mix of fear and determination, knowing he was about to uncover the truth that Henry had guarded so zealously. They reached the basement, the same place where Jack had seen Henry perform the strange rituals. Now, the space seemed even darker, almost as if it had been waiting for something long overdue. Henry stopped in front of the old wooden chest that Jack had seen in the recordings. He opened it with a smooth motion, as if handling a sacred artifact. From inside, Henry retrieved a small iron box, covered with inscriptions that Jack couldn't decipher. "This is the true treasure of the mansion," Henry said, his eyes fixed on the box. "But it's not the kind of treasure you're imagining, Jack. It's not gold, nor jewels. It's something far more valuable and dangerous." Jack watched as Henry unlocked the box with an ancient key, similar to the one Jack had found behind the secret panel. With an almost imperceptible click, the box opened, revealing a bundle of old papers yellowed with age and a small glass vial sealed with red wax. Henry took the vial with a reverence that made Jack's blood run cold. "This vial contains what remains of an elixir, a substance created by alchemists centuries ago," Henry explained, his voice laden with almost religious respect. "They say this elixir is the key to immortality, but it also carries a curse." Jack felt the weight of Henry's words. Everything was starting to make sense now. The rituals, the symbols, the relentless search. Henry wasn't after material fortune, but something that could give him power over death itself. "But what do you really want with this, Henry?" Jack asked, trying to stay calm. Henry smiled, a smile that offered no comfort. "I want to finish what I started so long ago, Jack. I was one of the few who knew of this elixir's existence, and I swore to myself that I would find the complete formula. But to do that, I need what's hidden here, in this mansion." Henry placed the vial back in the box and removed one of the old papers, carefully unrolling it. The paper was covered in symbols and complex formulas, written in a language Jack didn't recognize. "This is the map that will guide me to what I seek," Henry said, staring intently at the parchment. "The mansion holds the final piece of the puzzle, a book, a diary that contains the necessary information to complete the formula. With it, I will be able to recreate the elixir and finish the work of the alchemists who came before me." Jack realized just how deep the abyss Henry had plunged into was. "But at what cost, Henry?" Jack asked, his voice filled with concern. "Are you willing to sacrifice everything, everyone for this?" Henry didn't respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the parchment. "Some sacrifices are necessary, Jack," he finally said, his voice as cold as stone. "Those who understand the value of what's at stake will know that this is the only way." Jack felt the weight of Henry's words. Now he knew that the visitor wouldn't stop at anything to achieve his goal. The truth about the treasure hidden in the mansion wasn't just about material wealth, but about a power that could alter the course of life and death. Jack, with his heart racing, realized that the battle he was about to fight wasn't just for the mansion or its owners, but for the very essence of what it meant to be human. And he knew that somehow he had to stop Henry from going any further, before it was too late. Henry, still staring at the parchment, indicated that Jack should follow him. They ascended the basement stairs in silence, the atmosphere heavy with a nearly palpable tension. Jack knew that what was about to happen would change everything. They walked up to the second floor where Henry headed to the oldest room in the mansion, a room that was rarely used and that even Jack avoided. The room was filled with old furniture covered by sheets, giving the place a ghostly appearance, as if time had stopped there. Henry, with an almost ceremonial gesture, removed one of the sheets, revealing an old dark wooden desk. Without saying a word, he knelt down and began to feel around the floor near the desk until he found a small lever hidden beneath the baseboard. With a soft click, a secret compartment opened on the side of the desk. Inside, there was a single object, a leather-bound diary, worn with age, with the edges of the pages yellowed. Henry picked it up carefully, as if handling something sacred. "Here lies the true treasure of this house," he murmured, more to himself than to Jack. Jack watched in silence as Henry opened the diary. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, drawings of symbols that Jack now recognized, and texts in an ancient language he couldn't decipher. But it wasn't the esoteric content that caught Jack's attention. Between the pages, there were letters and personal notes, intimate details of the family that had built the mansion. They were accounts of happy moments, but also of dark secrets, tragedies hidden behind the thick walls of the house. The diary revealed that the search for the elixir wasn't the only story hidden there. The family itself carried deep and disturbing secrets. One of the diary entries made Jack's heart race. It was a confession from one of the family's ancestors, describing the pact that had been made to protect the secret of the elixir. The man admitted that, in exchange for power and knowledge, he had sacrificed something much more valuable: his own soul and the souls of his descendants. The curse that hung over the mansion wasn't just about the elixir, it was about the price each generation had to pay for that secret. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized that the current owners of the mansion, unknowingly, were bound to this curse, condemned by choices made centuries ago. Henry seemed absorbed in the diary's revelations, his eyes darkening as he read. "They never knew," he murmured, once again speaking to himself. "They never knew what their ancestors did, what they sacrificed to protect this secret." Jack realized that although Henry was after the elixir, what he now found was a story of betrayal, guilt, and despair, a story that corroded the roots of the family he so despised, yet at the same time, so envied. When Henry closed the diary, his demeanor had changed. He was no longer the calm and controlled man Jack knew. There was a silent fury in his eyes, mixed with a deep sadness. "This is their legacy, Jack," he said, his voice low but loaded with emotion. A legacy of despair kept alive for generations. Everything they did, all the power they tried to achieve, was built on a foundation of lies and sacrifices. And now, it's up to me to decide what to do with it. Jack, sensing the gravity of the situation, knew that this was the decisive moment. The true treasure of the mansion wasn't the elixir, but the story it represented, a story that had destroyed lives and still had the power to destroy more. Henry held the diary as if it were the key to his destiny, and Jack knew that the decisions made there could forever change the course of history, both for Henry and for the family that had built the mansion. After a long and tense night, the first light of dawn began to invade the mansion's corridors. Jack, exhausted both physically and emotionally, felt the weight of everything that had happened in the past few hours. Henry had left the mansion before sunrise, taking the revealing diary with him, but something had changed in him. Jack could see it in his eyes. Perhaps finally Henry had understood the price of his obsession. With the diary in hand, he had left without another word, and the mansion, for the first time in a long time, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The owners returned that same day, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in their absence. Jack, still processing everything, greeted them with a tired but genuine smile. The mansion, despite everything, was intact, and Jack knew he had done what was necessary to protect not only the house, but also the secrets it held. With a sense of duty fulfilled, he watched the owners as they walked through the rooms, unaware of how close they had come to tragedy. Days later, the owners called Jack for a meeting in the main office. The atmosphere was lighter, as if an invisible shadow had finally dissipated. They thanked Jack for his loyalty, for taking such great care of the mansion over all those years, and even more so during the recent events, of which Jack shared only the necessary details. They didn't need to know the whole truth. Some secrets should remain buried so that peace could be restored. With sincere words and eyes shining with gratitude, the owners announced that Jack would receive a promotion, a position of even greater trust, with a substantially increased salary. Moreover, they gave him a small house on the property grounds, a place of his own where he could live in peace, surrounded by the lands he had protected for so long. Jack, touched by the gesture, humbly accepted, feeling that he had finally found his place in the world, a place where he was more than just a caretaker. He was the guardian of the mansion's history and soul. As the days passed, the mansion returned to its normal routine, but with a noticeable difference. The atmosphere was lighter, more welcoming, as if the house had shed a burden that had oppressed it for decades. The nights became peaceful, without the unsettling whispers that had once disturbed Jack's sleep. The corridors, once dark and full of secrets, now seemed just like corridors, part of a house that had finally found its peace. And Jack, in his new home, could finally rest, knowing that he had fulfilled his duty. However, there was something more. The mansion's owners, recognizing Jack's importance in their lives and in the house's history, decided to create a fund in his name, dedicated to the maintenance and preservation of the property. It was a way to ensure that regardless of what the future might bring, the mansion would remain a safe haven, protected by those who loved it and understood its true value. Jack, upon hearing this, felt a deep satisfaction. It wasn't just a material reward, but recognition that his role there had been crucial. And so, with the passage of time, the mansion continued to stand majestically, a silent witness to generations, protected by someone who understood the importance of every stone, every room, every secret. Jack, in his new home, looked at the mansion with a mixture of pride and serenity, knowing that, finally, the past had been put to rest. The mansion, once shrouded in mystery and darkness, now shone with a renewed light, reflecting the peace that Jack had helped to restore. If you enjoyed Jack's incredible story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming videos. If you love emotional chronicles and want to support our channel to continue bringing more quality content, consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Your help is essential for us to keep improving. Thank you for your support. See you in the next exciting chronicle.